meeting is that I've become aware of a number of projects where people are saying that they need retrospective fire strategies done. So let me roll back a bit on that. A lot of what we're trying to do with the Golden Thread Task Force has been to understand and get through what is really needed and what's being done as just a compliance exercise, as it were. And what we obviously want to try and do is to make it so that whatever activities we're asking people to do and supply chains to do are actually useful and valuable. And one of the things that has become clear, both in the like the design group meeting, for example, is that and discussing the role of the principal designer and the principal contractor is the importance of being able to refer things back to the fire strategy. And I think on new builds, fire strategies are done, but they then don't get updated. Or in some cases, they don't get updated during construction. And that has got obviously an impact on building safety. But that's not the topic that we want to cover today. What we want to cover today is how are we addressing things from a retrospective perspective, because what we've actually got is circumstances where the fire strategy hasn't been updated for some time, maybe because of a lack of resources or a lack of available expertise. But fire risk assessments, which are the statutory things, are still being done. And from what I'm told, a fire strategy, a fire risk assessment needs to have a current fire strategy. So Matt, I was talking this through with Matt Wilkie, who is leading our PFI work stream, along with Richard Bacon from Albany. And what we've identified, what he's identified on projects, is they don't have a fire strategy, or they may not have a current fire strategy, because some of the tenants who are maybe subtenants in their schemes haven't told the trust or the landlord what they're using the spaces for. They've not kept their information up to date. So there are holes in the overall strategy because it's not been kept up to date. The second problem is that fire engineers are already very, very busy. So therefore, to actually be able to engage a fire engineer, a lot of their time is taken finding information that that should be more easily available. So this seems to all fold in really quite well with what we're trying to do with the Golden Thread. So if we can make sure that the information that is required by a fire engineer to actually carry out a fire strategy is more accessible and available, then their task is much more straightforward. The risk is lower for the fire engineer. They need to spend less time on it, and therefore cost impact. So it seems that there's a degree of standardization, or that the standardization of information to make it more findable is a worthwhile thing to explore. So that's principally what we set this meeting up to explore. The other aspect of it, though, is that in going through this exercise, Matt found that it got a couple of schemes where a tenant had actually put security systems in which conflicted with the fire strategy. And it may be because the fire strategy hadn't been updated, or it may be that whoever was doing that had looked at things from a security perspective, but not from a fire strategy perspective. So we asked our experts in security, asked Abloy. Roy's been helping us for the last 4 years or so to have a view on that, and Roy said, yes, it is something that needs to be aligned. So I'd like to I'll stand back for a minute and just ask whether people think that this approach of doing things in a more joined up, organized way makes sense. Or the further bit is ventilation. So the reason Paul White's come along, who is our expert in ventilation, in particular smoke ventilation, is that's another part of the equation. And at some stage, I might go back to my graphic that most of you have seen, where we talk through a scenario where fire breaks out in the kitchen, etc. So I think, Matt, are you here yet?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay. That's a relief, Matt.
Okay. Yeah, so the computer decided to do an update just as about to join.
No, it's absolutely okay. So I'm going to step back for a minute and just ask. I spoke to Ron Hedger about Paul White. Kindly introduced me to Ron, who's a fire engineer. Paul's a ventilation engineer, as I said earlier, and they work together. So I asked Ron to join the group and share with us his experience. But before I go on to do that, has anybody else got any comments or contributions to make?
George,
is this a good idea?
Yes, it's Bernard.
Bernard.
I would certainly wish to contribute in regard to toxicity, if I may.
Certainly.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
Carl, you and I had a good conversation there a couple of weeks ago. Have you got some thoughts on this?
I agree. We did have a good conversation a week or so back. With regard to your observation about fire risk assessment requires fire strategy, of course, you're right. I think in less complex buildings, simple blocks of flats, for example, it is appropriate to expect that a competent fire risk assessor can make judgments about what the fire strategy was intended to be without having reference to the document. But as soon as it becomes more complex, while I'm dealing with myself, for example, at the moment, is the head office of the housing association involved. It has 2 floors of residential above, so it's 6 stories in total, 3 of which are largely devoted to parking. There's 2 floors of largely commercial activity and so on. There's a community hall in the building. And I am constantly referring back to the fire strategy document to understand exactly what the thought process was. And I find this quite a lot, that some of the thought processes in putting together fire strategies are really quite clever, well thought through solutions to issues. And a fire risk assessor going into a building without that thought process made clear to them can very often fail to see what the intent and what the design is intended to achieve, and can make poor judgments for that lack of information. So I entirely agree with you that a fire strategy document underpins a lot of the future fire safety. My only other observation at this point, what I think I heard you say is that a fire strategy document requires a fire engineer to put it together. Is that the position here, or did I misunderstand what was said?
No, I don't. If I said that, I was wrong. Yeah, but it certainly needs to be somebody that is competent and can demonstrate that competence. Yeah.
Yeah, without question. Yeah. Those are my thoughts at this point.
Sorry, I just wanted to actually reiterate and confirm that point. A fire engineer is a bit of a loose term. It would be lovely if it were actually protected or defined in some way. I think the important aspect here is that even in a simple building, a fire documentation of the fire strategy is necessary. However, that can be as simple as the fire strategy completely follows a particular guidance document, for instance, the approved document B. That would be suitable evidence for then a competent person to come in and assess the fire risk within that building. As soon as you start stepping away from the absolute prescription, then more writing is required. As you pointed out, Carl, sometimes, particularly with complex buildings, a lot of thought goes into how to achieve that level of safety. And if it's not recorded, then it evaporates over time, simply by a lack of appreciation, a Chinese whispers type process. The important thing is that strategy needs to be recorded and maintained by someone who is competent to understand what is written, what is being changed. So that can be a completely lay person, if it is who's just able to comprehend the standard prescriptive guidance, or it might need to be an extremely qualified and experienced fire engineer, for using that term, or fire safety consultant, who can interpret the written document and understand what the original process was and then change it in a way that remains suitable.
Thank you, Ron.
Hi, George. Couple of things to sort of highlight as I see as some issues. Firstly, when we actually develop the design for a new build project, often the access control security systems are in a separate package to the door hardware. So often there's not collaboration between the two, so it's not always clear the correct solution is being defined, and sometimes and this is something I see quite often, you get if it's a multi-tenant building, you may get the initial fire strategy being developed for that building, but that doesn't take account of the individual tenants' access control that they then come in and deploy on the building. And I'm not always seeing a joined up approach, where the security system installers are being given that fire strategy to base their design on for that application. So often there's a disconnect between the two elements. It's not clear that what is being proposed actually is in alignment with the actual fire strategy for the building. And of course, if we add any form of locking to a door, which is an escape door or a fire rated door, that can have an impact on that overall fire safety within that building. And that's a common scenario, I find.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that, as I understand it, some tenants are reluctant to provide the landlord with the information about what they've done to the building, or what they've done to their spaces, so that we end up in a situation where the landlord doesn't know what the spaces are being used for.
Yeah.
And that, as I understand it, is quite fundamental in terms of understanding what the risks are, in particular around storage and things like that.
Well, particularly when you may have escape from, if you've got a multi-floor building where you may have to escape back into a tenant area in order to reach the alternative escape route.
Yes. Yeah. So picking up on that, Paul, Matt, do you want to just give an example of, the one that you've done a graphic for that, haven't you?
I've done a quick sketch this morning. It's not the best, but it's what I had available at the time.
Well, do you want to talk through the background of that a little bit, and then we can cover it?
Yeah. Can people see the screen?
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically what you've got here, this is a building where it's a building that's managed by an SPV landlord, but the main tenant's the healthcare, and then local authority have taken on some areas. Now, because the healthcare area is open to the public, they then put maglocks and door access systems. The local authority then put maglocks and door access systems onto the door on the corridor, so that people couldn't access the areas controlled by the local authority, because their kitchen, their help desk, everything's on the other side of the door. But the problem is the stairwell for the fire exit is actually in their part of the building. So they selected to take it that side of the corridor rather than the other side, because their kitchen facilities is also on there. What they should have done is actually probably just put a door access to the kitchen and possibly a door further down that opens towards the stairwell, so that they still got the access facilities. But in this case, they blocked the fire exit for the people in the healthcare facility. But the problem you've got there is the local authority is not our tenant. The healthcare manage the building and the tenants, but at the same time, this is where a fire strategy has not been updated and the door system's been altered without agreement or discussion. It's just happened. And it's normally not one door either. I've had it where you've had like 60, 70 doors have all had door access systems fitted to them, without any agreements, no service contracts, nothing. And then it's it's always been there, because suddenly nobody owns it as well. That's the other issue you get with that. But that's quite a common theme that you experience in dealing with PFI, PPP contracts, is people alter things and don't tell you, and then when you find it, they deny all knowledge of it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt.
Right.
Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, George. It was just picking up on what Matt's just mentioned there. It's quite common. I think I work in the leasehold world, property management and mobilisation of large complex developments. And Carl's earlier comment, I think simple block of flats. I don't think I've ever come across a simple block of flats there, Carl, but I know how complex they can be, particularly when you throw into the mix commercial units, amenity spaces, community halls or community areas, retail, and you've got people living above them. It becomes a challenge. But what I wanted to pick up on, we mentioned the fire safety strategy. Now, I've got experience working with large developers, and real life experience tells me that actually the fire safety strategy is something that's required at the very early stages of the development, part of the planning process. So it needs to be evidenced. What I then see is then that same fire safety strategy at the completion stages. So Regulation 38 handed over, albeit not in its entirety. Occupation happens as a result. A building assessment certificate has been issued for compliance, but it doesn't actually quite work for me, because compliance is one thing. The site being a development during occupation is something else, and that does happen. The question there is it ready for occupation? The answer is no, but I've got a safety assessment certificate that tells me it's compliant, therefore occupation can happen. I'm deviating slightly, but that building safety assessment, the building safety strategy is the same document in the R38 handover as an as-built as it was at the design stage. Now, I know that document because I've read it front to back. Says in version 1 that the strategy will be and should be, and so it makes reference to what it needs to be. The actual document at the handover says exactly the same. Now, I wanted to say that it's not, it should be, that actually it is.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't happen. So I get everything we're talking about, but in real life scenarios, from personal experience, I would love to say that the process works. I don't think the process does. And I talk a lot, George, about the deliverables and the ownership and the responsibility and kind of whose is it. And who should be checking? That the deliverable is at the completion stage, the same as it was at the planning stage. Now, who's to check that that is correct? Because if I challenge it, I'm told I've got a building assessment certificate which confirms compliance. So I just want to put it out there that it's kind of, nothing's perfect. I think we all know what our problems are. And I'm kind of really keen to kind of get to the point where we can talk about what the solutions are, because I'm not quite sure we're there yet, but we should be.
No, I agree. Paul, if I could just give an answer to Andrew before I hand on to you, right? So absolutely agree with you. One of the things that I think is that's part of what we're trying to do, Andrew, to get an industry consensus in terms of what good looks like.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I had a very interesting meeting this morning with a lady called Elspeth Grant, who's she'd done a lot of work over the years on fire safety, but also from a point of view of disabled people, and PEEPs and all that sort of stuff. And she's coming along to we've got another session on Thursday on AWAB's law. Now, she gave me a bit of education this morning, and that is that AWAB's law, which everybody is seeing as the damp and mold legislation, also incorporates fire safety and electrical safety. Yeah. So the new legislation that came into effect last Monday, I think it was, now, or 2 weeks ago, I think, that now requires any serious risk to be resolved within 24 hours. Yeah, not a working day, 24 hours. So she was saying that she thinks that's probably impossible. And certainly from an electrical and a fire safety perspective, being able to address things, I mean, clearly that creates a whole level of additional priority on these things. But I think that's a very interesting perspective to take.
Yeah, I think the whole 24 hours, I mean, mission impossible. If it is possible, it's going to come at a cost and the tenant will pay.
Sorry, that was the other thing that she said.
Circle.
So what she was also saying is that the PEEPs legislation, what she was quite a wealth of information. She'll be coming on Thursday, so we can grill her there. But what I'll write up my notes from what she's told me and share them. But what was very interesting as well, she was explaining that she's been doing this for a long time, and she was saying that back in, I think, 2009, the government, as it was at the time, defunded the fire services from a point of view of having responsibility for checking fire, and as a result of that, a lot of the roles that were in the fire services for actually overseeing fire disappeared. So, and in doing that, the fire services no longer have the responsibility that they used to have. But who did pick it up? Yeah. The other thing that she said was that the with person-centered fire risk assessments, which is apparently now the law, if things need doing, let's say, for example, somebody's storing a mobility scooter in a corridor, if that's identified as a risk, it's up to the tenant to address it. Also, evacuation lifts and things like that. If an evacuation, not evacuation lift, but evacuation chair, is it, that if that's identified and the landlord says that's the device that's needed is maybe, she was saying 650 quid or something like that, and they go back to the tenant and say, you need to pay for this. If they haven't got the money, they may well just go and buy an evacuation chair off eBay or Amazon, which is not fit for purpose, but it then is a problem. So I don't want to get too heavily into social housing, because social housing obviously is an important thing, but we've got people on here that, you know, like Anne from Resolus and probably Claire as well, who are coming at things more from other types of buildings as well. So it's not focused at all. I mean, and certainly Matt's doing hospitals and schools and things. So I'll hand over to Paul now.
Sorry, thanks, George. That's really interesting. And I know it was going, oh, impossible 24 hours, but you know what? If it was 3 months, it'd still be saying impossible 3 months. So it's almost good to have a near impossible deadline so people get off the backsides and actually take it as seriously as they should do. There's some comments earlier on which sort of trigger me, and I look over here now straight ahead of me at 22 Bishopsgate, which is, as George knows, I'm a vocal critic of, and have been since the day they started putting cement on the ground. And I'd love to know who exactly signs off in terms of fire safety and fire expertise on a building that's 64 stories tall, has 13,000 people, and has 2 evacuation stairways, which, when I started protesting, was told by WSP that was because people were getting more and more obese, so they can't evacuate through stairways. Well, in that case, you don't build a building so tall, was my logical, common sense approach response back. I was then rebutted again and said, oh, we're using the lifts as my joke. And every presentation I give is the first commandment is, thou shalt not use a lift in a fire. That is exactly how you evacuate 22 Bishopsgate. And as I said back to AX at the time, it was not my guerrilla marketing campaign to crash a helicopter into their building in New York, into their plant room. That's exactly what happened about 3 weeks after my last conversation with them. And I just question how in 2025, as Dame Judah Hackett said recently, only 31% of high-rise buildings that she gets at Gateway 1 pass fire compliance. And I do ask myself, I think she's the only person who's actually right. The whole sector just simply has got a horrendously bad culture. And I just come back from 5 countries over in the Far East. And I was working all last weekend in Shanghai, and every building I walk into, you can see clear as day where the fire extinguishers are, where the fire hose reels are. It's not hidden away. Whereas I think we got here to the UK, and I walk around this building here, I don't even know where the fire extinguishers are anymore, because it's so hidden away and so numbed down in terms of their advertising, because aesthetically they don't want people seeing stuff anymore. We're not taking fire safety here in the UK seriously at all, and it's about time we all just stood up and stated that clearly. I think we've got to get to a stage where we start digitalizing things, where nobody can get away any longer. So if you make a change to this floor, this building, and you change the way the fire strategy should be, you legally have to have it digitalized. You made a change and you have informed all the people working this floor, whether they're here on that day or not, that this is the new fire strategy because we've changed out the layout, etc. I've talked to George over the weekend for a couple of hours, and I did say to him, look, what I see in Hong Kong and what I see certainly in Shanghai in particular is a totally different attitude to fire safety. It's completely chalk and cheese to here. And I hope in the next few months we're going to bring together some people from that side of the world over here to sort of show on a session like this where they've gone, what they're doing, why they've moved from manual box ticking, which, let's face facts, we all know a lot of people just box ticks because they're too busy to actually do the real inspection, but digitalize the entire system going forward. Because I, for one, I'm not going to sit here and be quiet and keep my mouth closed and go with the flow. And it's going to change, whether it's correctly, politely, or if it's me putting my size 11s up people's backside, it will change. And I'm here on the 39th floor of this building. And as George knows well, I've told him this a couple of times, I was here at 10:30 at night about 14, 15 months ago when we had a power cut, which is unusual, but every fire evacuation sign was broken because nobody changed the batteries for 12 years. In terms of Abbas Abloy, which you mentioned earlier on, well, I went to all 4 fire evacuation doorways, of which not one of them would open. And nobody knew there was 5 of us still here on the 39th floor of the building at 10:30 at night. Now, I just get to a stage where I question how in 2025 we have become, with so much data, we become so incomprehensibly, I don't know the words any longer, to know that there's basic things we should know are happening. I mean, they used to know I was in the building 4 years ago. They don't know anymore because of convenience. So I have to tap in, like all of you probably do most commercial buildings, but the same as 22 Bishopsgate, the same as this building here. When I get to the exit gate, it automatically opens, it doesn't know I've left. You know, this is a little silly now. And there's so many areas from changing batteries logically at a certain time and digitalizing that you did change all those batteries to having data on who is in your building, especially where a ladder can't get anywhere close to you. That just needs to happen. And I sit here think to myself, am I just surrounded by people who have no common sense?
Well, yeah, no, you're not. I think we've got, you're surrounded by people that are also bothered. We are on this group. That's why we're here. But yeah, look, I just think I hope in the next couple of months with George, we'll bring some real expertise from overseas countries where they take things a little more seriously. I mean, certainly from all my visits to China. I mean, my view is that we've probably got the expertise here as well, Paul. The problem that we've got is actually communicating that to people that have probably got control of budgets and things. Carl, you're next, I think.
Thanks, George. And can I just briefly, this wasn't my point, can I just briefly say, I think I agree with almost every word Paul has said there. And I share your concern, Paul, about not this group, but how others think and feel about fire safety. And what I wanted to come back to, and I know the conversation has moved on, and I'll be very brief, is this upcoming implementation of the residential PEEP legislation. So that's the acronym chosen by the Home Office for this, residential PEEPs, personal emergency evacuation plans. I'm seeing a lot of disinformation about exactly what this legislation involves and requires. Some of that misinformation being published by people who hope to make a further living out of the process. The reality is that certainly in residential, above 18 metres, you must have PCFRA and PEEP in place, and anything 11 metres and above that's on a simultaneous evacuation strategy. The implication from that, although it's not necessarily always the case, but the implication is there'll be an alarm system that will trigger that evacuation. Anything above 11 metres with a simultaneous evacuation must also have our PEEPs in place. That legislation comes into effect on the 6th of April next year, but it is not an overarching piece of legislation that affects every residential. It doesn't affect every block of flats, only those above 11 with an alarm system in place, full evacuation in place, and anything above 18 metres.
Thank you, Carl. I mean, coming round to it, what I'm looking to do is see if we can use our expertise and technology as well to be able to make it easier for us to address this. And certainly when Paul introduced me to Ron Hedger, Ron was well, I was talking with him. Anybody that knows me, you'll know that from an asset management perspective, I've been singing the strategy of using 360 photographs as being one way of us being able to do things remotely that otherwise would require site visits, and that takes a long time. And when I was explaining that to Ron said that that's exactly what he does. He uses 360 photos. So can I just, Ron, could you, sorry, Pierre, you've just put your hand up. Yeah, okay. Ron, can you just explain the process? Because Ron's a fire engineer. So do you want to just explain what you were explaining to me a while ago?
Yes. This is to an extent, a very minor part of my interest in what's been said so far today. But I'll start with that and see where we go. A growing proportion of my work now is in producing and recording retrospective fire strategies. I have been expecting a surge in this since the Building Safety Act, the various bits of legislation came into force. There's been a longer delay than I had assumed, but it does appear to be gathering momentum now. And my appreciation of that is that any complex building cannot really have a suitable fire risk assessment carried out unless that fire risk assessor understands what it is that's been provided for that safety. I am now being called into buildings that have had fire risk assessments completed since the fire safety order came in, where suddenly they are realizing that all that has happened is that someone has come in and looked at what's there and identified whether or not what is there, or what is apparently there, has been maintained, which is not the same as a fire risk assessment. So therefore, I'm having to start from scratch and try and guess at what the original fire protection measures were in buildings. As a very quick example, I'm currently looking at a block of 6 residential buildings which were built into 1906 and as purpose-built flats, and had an additional penthouse put on in 1991. I have absolutely no idea what the original fire strategy, what the fire protection mechanisms were. I can find no guidance whatsoever to tell me what they might have been designed to, and in effect they are blisteringly dangerous because there's no protection that I can see of either their internal stairs. Each block has 1 internal stair and access to 2 external stairs. I'm therefore having to apply some aspect of modern design and how much risk can I accept liability for in saying, do this, this will make it good enough. In order to arrive at that, obviously I have to survey the buildings, and the only way that I can gather enough information to come back to my desk and actually have a reasonable stab at guessing what was meant and what might be good enough is to actually carry a 360 camera with me, perched on my shoulder, Norwegian blue parrot and all the rest of it, which will then record my walk around all those parts of the building that I can gain access to. A typical survey of one of these blocks might take me 4 hours doing it that way. And then probably another 15 hours of assessing and digesting and recording what I can see from the 360 recording, because that gives me access to what was beside me, what was below me, what was above me, that I may well not have looked around, observed, actually noted that I was noticing it and recorded it on my pad of whatever form, whether that's hard copy or electronic. So I then end up with a 360-degree video of all of those parts of the building that I've walked around, which then forms part of my record of due diligence if I'm then called to justify the documentation of the existing fire precautions as I saw them on the day.
That's really helpful. Anybody else got any? Pierre, carry on, please.
You're mute.
You're on mute. Ah, okay. You might need to reboot. We can't hear you, Pierre. Mustafa.
Hi, George. Mine is more of, I think, a question to help enrich the conversation. And I do agree with most of the contributions that have been made today. But one thing that I've heard, and it's clear, is that in terms of documenting the fire strategy, it's sort of something that ought to be done, not something that must be done. So could raising the awareness for the need of some sort of statutory requirement for the updating of that fire strategy be something we could contribute to? And also, secondly, for example, some sort of framework in terms of how organizations may be able to build a retrospective fire strategy, for example. Would that be something that may help?
I think both of those things I agree, but to the latter one I think is more within our grasp. I think the former one, getting legislative changes is more challenging. But what I would say is that there's a logical way of dealing with this, in my view. My understanding is there is a statutory duty to create a fire risk assessment. Am I right on that?
Can I come in there, please?
Yeah, please.
So in answer to both of your questions, Mustafa, first of all, there is a legal requirement. It's Article 8 of the Fire Safety Order, which requires that, as it was written in the Fire Safety Order, anyone who employs 5 or more people must record their fire safety arrangements. That is not just the fire strategy, but also the policy and procedure that implements the fire strategy, which includes the management, testing, maintenance, staff training, drilling, and everything else. However, at the time that the fire safety order came in, it was identified as a cut and paste from the Health and Safety at Work Act, because that has an absolutely identical statement, and nobody interpreted it in the CLG, the Home Office guidance on carrying out a fire safety risk assessment, and so it never really got addressed. It is, however, so everybody knows that Article 9 says you must carry out a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment. What nobody has identified is that that suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment is supposed to be based on the recorded fire safety arrangements, which come under the previous article. And the unfortunate thing, which answers a question from previously, I'm not quite sure who stated it, is that the fire safety the fire safety environment that we currently live in is only as good as the enforcement of that arrangement. 20-something years ago, it was argued that the industry wanted lighter touch regulation. The Fire Precautions Act was withdrawn. That was not light touch regulation. That was, you will do this and you will maintain it, and we'll check every year to make sure you are, and prosecute if you're not from the fire service. That was lifted. Fire safety order came in, self-regulation. My own personal opinion on self-regulation is it is only as strong as how scared are you of the regulator. Health and safety executive, everyone's extremely scared of them. Fire service, no one's scared of the fire service because they are the nice guys. They've also, as has been stated, have been defunded, such that my own experience, the office I started in had 12 fire safety inspectors. It currently now has 1 part-time fire safety inspector. All fire safety inspectors, so that's less than 10% of what used to be there. The 12 used to have direct involvement in the design of the buildings. There is no fire service involvement in the design of buildings now. That is all external. I currently run a consultancy which designs those buildings. I have nothing to do with the fire service anymore. I'm a private concern. So not only are there very few of them, but they don't actually have the experience of designing the buildings in order to fall back on to work out what they're looking at. So there is no, in effect, there's precious little in the way of regulation going on when it comes to fire safety. And I think that's one of the primary reasons we are where we are now. We've had 20 years of actually no scrutiny of what it means to comply. Hence things like doors that don't open, managing agents who don't know who's in the building, tenants who change things without any idea what they're changing them from or to, or how it affects the rest of the building. Those are all prosecutable offences, but there's no one prosecuting them.
Right.
Sorry, that's I'll step off my soapbox now.
I,
Can I
that's
come
very
in there,
helpful.
Jules, just on that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So, and I think, Ron, that's that's great, brilliant. I mean, I've seen the fire brigade report, building sign off, which is crucial to the NHBC handover, etc., which is all required for occupation to take place. It's kind of it's geared up. It's that box ticking exercise. It's geared up to generate a revenue because occupation equals money in the bank for the developer. I get the model. I've seen the certificates, and there are recommendations that have been made by the fire brigade or the LFB in regards to things that need to happen. But they've signed it. I'm chasing whether those things have happened in line with what's been recommended by the fire brigade. But I kind of almost want to kind of say, you said that the fire brigade have no powers. I mean, enforcement, I think is a strong word, but should it be enforcement? Which makes me think, should the fire brigade have a right to raise a mandatory occurrence report?
I need to correct one thing there. I didn't say they have no powers. They have extremely draconian powers. They're just not in a position to exercise them. The actual powers that the fire safety order give the fire services as the enforcing agents are extremely high powered. They can close a building down at the drop of a hat and just say, you're out on the street now.
Yeah.
Pass it over to the local authority to rehouse.
Which I've seen
but
happen, yeah.
There are very, very few fire safety inspectors now. They're just the numbers have been thinned enormously, and those that are there tend not to be serving operational firefighters, so they don't have the knowledge of the buildings on fire that the old 20-30-year-old brigade used to, and they are they're loath, this is my opinion, based on my experiences, they are loath to take a prosecution unless it's an absolute surefire win, because their brigade is the enforcer and would have to fit to foot the bill. If they lose, then the brigade is out of pocket for costs involved in having taken that case and not in fact brought it to a positive fruition.
That's a very that's a very useful bit of knowledge, Ron. I've heard this also from the HSE, that the HSE, one of the reasons the HSE generally under CDM don't prosecute as frequently as they perhaps should, is because they exactly as you've said, they're actually liable as a department for that. And if it's a fire service, that's even more exposed, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the cost of taking an unsuccessful prosecution could in fact bankrupt a fire service.
Yeah.
Particularly if it's an American company.
Yes, understood. Roy, you were going to say something, Carl, were you?
I was,
sorry?
yes. I was just waiting for you to finish there, yeah. I just wanted to comment on something that Ron touched on about the fire safety order and so on. We have to keep in mind with the fire safety order that it assumes that the building is in existence already. And so Article 9 requires a suitable and sufficient assessment of the risks to which relevant persons are exposed for the purpose of identifying the general fire precautions. And yes, I did just read that from the legislation.
Yes. Yep.
So the required suitable and sufficient assessment of risk is not about designing the building. And indeed, when you look at various guidance for fire risk assessors, it almost always makes the point that the fire risk assessor is not there to second guess the designer and so on and so on. And I think that this is often missed by those carrying out fire risk assessment, that what they're there to do is identify the necessary precautions, confirm whether they're there, and identify those other precautions, mitigating controls, if you will, that should be there. And I think going back to this point about locks on escape routes, for example, I think that absolutely does fall on the fire risk assessor to know what's going on in the building as they make that assessment about general precautions. So I think that distinction between design and the ongoing assessment of risk and the necessary precautions is one that we should keep in mind.
Can I come in there?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. And I have been involved in some projects where the building has been designed and it has been signed off as actually meeting the design very nicely, but is completely not fit for purpose, because the use to which the building is then going to be put means that they need to do significantly more work to make it safe. And of course, then everyone involved gets extremely upset, because there has been some original client focused consultation at the beginning, and then the client gets involved at the end, and what has happened in the middle is that the design has gone off somewhere which is not actually applicable to the end use of the building, or the building has been built for a generic a generic commercial use, and then at the end, with that completion certificate, or usually prior to gaining the completion certificate, arrangements have been made with an occupier to take it at completion. The occupier has taken it and they do something with the building which is outside the scope of the original design. And so the building is not fit for purpose and needs to be redesigned. I'm working with a healthcare premises which has moved into a generic shell and core commercial, I think it was 3-story office building. They should never have done that. It's the extra work that they need to do to make it work as a hospital is just unbelievable, and they're obviously not very pleased. But nevertheless, it's not fit for purpose as it stands. Just because they've bought it and it's new, or they've taken on a long lease and it's new, doesn't mean they should have done.
Ron, yeah. So
yes.
Just before I hand over to Roy, what we obviously want to try and do with this group, we've spent an hour talking about what the problems are,
Yes,
sharing our frustrations, which is all good stuff. What I'd like to do is spend the last half hour or so talking through what we can do about it. How can we do things to make them easier? And just to prompt some thinking on that, is it possible to have more some more standardized solutions maybe for certain archetypes, certain types of buildings that could be applied maybe 80% of the activity, and then the other 20% to make them building specific? That's one idea. Also looking at things from a point of view of the golden thread. Now, the golden thread for me is about making sure that we've got the right information, documents, drawings, photographs, etc., that we can then glue together easily, so that so that the fire engineer, or maybe in Roy's case, looking at things from an access strategy, or Paul White's case, looking at things from a smoke ventilation perspective, can actually pull these things together. So I think that's something that we'd like to talk about. Maybe we won't be able to get onto that adequately in this session, but if you agree that this is a worthwhile thing to go with, and certainly it's been an active enough conversation, I think so, then we can set up another one. So Pierre, can I just hand over to Roy?
Thank you, George. It was just one thing to finish off on what we've just been covering, and I agree with everything Ron has said. There are other aspects of the regulations that are not being enforced. We have now the new construction products regulator, and we have within the building regs, and have had for quite a long time, since 2013, I think, Regulation 7, which requires us to ensure that anybody delivering solutions into the built environment can be proven to be competent in what they're doing, and also that any construction products we add into the built environment can be verified and proven to be suitable for the application they're using. So what it actually says, they must be fit for purpose and used in the applications for which they are designed. And of course, the easiest way of achieving that is through performance testing that proves that that product is used in the application for which it's designed to be used in. And of course, from a fire safety perspective, that's either being suitable for use on a fire door or suitable for use to provide that escape function. And we should have the construction products regulator enforcing that requirement, and sitting underneath the construction product regulator sits underneath the Office of Product Safety and Security. But my experience is there is no enforcement. I regularly see buildings being handed over, signed off with solutions installed on fire and escape doors which are non-compliant and have no performance testing to prove they're used in the correct applications. And that's another common issue that needs to be addressed as well, I think.
Yeah, Pierre, just before I hand over to you on that, I'd like to just raise a point on that, and that is that part of the challenge, Roy, is that the information that's being handed over is so disorganized and incomplete in many cases, that it's very, very difficult for anybody to do any checks anyway. Yeah. Now, in our new world of AI, that's something that should be easily addressed if we can get people to just comply with the information standards that they should be following anyway. But even if they're not, there are techniques that can be used to do that. So I think it is something that's quite doable.
And it's also in relation to the competence, because the people that are doing that checking need to be competent in what they're checking. And at the moment, the industry is still struggling to establish all of those sector specific competence frameworks. You know, there's still, I mean, there's lots of people talking about doing them, but you know, how many have we actually seen established? You know, they're still being developed at the moment, even though it is a requirement for them for people to be competent.
Well, as Matt was saying earlier, one of the problems is it's not a we need to move away from it being a compliance checking culture. You know, do you have the label? Do you have? I mean, there's been lots of conversations in recent weeks about whether whether things like BM Trada actually are truly providing any value in terms of identifying what people, and there's some very different views on that. Pierre. Still not working, Pierre. Still can't hear you. Sorry. Matt, before we, I mean, is this helpful for you as an asset manager, Matt? Are we on the right track with what we're trying to do here? Caroline, save me. I think Matt's gone for a coffee. You're on mute.
Okay. Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. I think, George, just to touch on, so sorry, I came in a bit late, so it might have been discussed, but I kind of like got the gist that the group seemed to be talking of like when a new build and what it should be and all the standards, but I work in already built, so the healthcare they're already built. It is what I have, you know. It is what I have, and all I can do is enforce that a fire risk assessment be done. So I can only tell the client that, look, you've got because it's a hospital, people that are sleeping here. So let's discuss, and it's there's this thing of let's discuss how often you should do a fire risk assessment, because that's the only thing that I can work off in compliance. So, and then it's like, oh yeah, maybe 3 years, or maybe 2 years. So I don't know how to go back and tell my client, what should I be looking at to go back and tell my client to say, hey, you need to implement, it's 2 yearly. And once a fire risk assessment is done, and I totally get what everyone is saying here, that the fire risk assessment is just there to give advice as such.
Yeah, Caroline, you did miss the beginning of it, but exactly what you've said. This is about existing buildings. That's what we're trying to do, not about new build. Yeah.
Okay.
But and the other thing that I think is probably quite helpful to you is that what Ron is saying, that it's not so much just the fire risk assessment, it's the fire strategy plan.
Yeah.
And what Ron is saying is that there's a legal duty for the presumably the landlord, is it, to have that fire strategy plan. Is that right, Ron? You're on mute, Ron.
Yeah, get all that out of the way. Yes, so personal opinion here, but based on a fair bit of experience. The confusion, I think, is that the retrospective fire strategy is the fire risk assessment. So the British Standard has brought out a new guidance document on residential fire risk assessment, and the old PAS 79 on both commercial and residential all referred to two processes. One was the fire risk assessment, which should be repeated on a basis of annual, 3-yearly, 5-yearly, something, whatever is reasonable, and a second process, which is a fire risk assessment review. Now, what everyone actually gets when they pay their money is a fire risk assessment review. It's the second order bit. It's the bit that originally 20 years ago was considered to be perfectly okay for the occupier to do. Residential is when you walk around and do your quarterly fire door checks to make sure they open, they close, the strips are okay. The fire risk assessment is, this is the building, this is what it's used for, this is what it's got in the way of fire precautions, is it good enough? Now that can be carried out every 5 years, and really just as have the existing management and maintenance processes continued. Has someone made a change that no one's noticed? No, fabulous, yes, okay, now we need to address it. But in the meantime, those fire risk assessment reviews should be continuing, and they should be as frequent as is necessary, which has stabilised at annual, but could be that they need it every 3 months. Or that every couple of years is okay. And the problem is that retrospective fire strategy, the original purposeful fire risk assessment, has sort of never been addressed. When I go and do one of my retrospective fire strategy surveys, I am looking at the actual active and passive fire precautions that the building has been provided with, and then what people are doing in there, what the people are like in there, what the procedures are, the overarching procedures, and I will then comment on whether, in my opinion, those are suitable and sufficient. That is the fire risk assessment. And then maintaining it, a fire risk assessor will come in and read that and say, is this still as it said in the document? If it's yes, fabulous. If it's no, it should go back to a competent fire consultant to work out what to do about it.
Okay, so I went into ChatGPT, my friend, and identified the documents or the information that would be typically needed for a retrospective fire strategy, and it's quite useful in that if we look at this, these are all things that we would expect to have for the golden thread. Mm-hmm. Now, my understanding is that, well, certainly in my experience, it's very seldom that any landlord would have that level of detail, that level of information that's current and up to date. And that's one of the things we're all wrestling with, isn't it, in the golden thread group. Now, if we could have a perspective, Ron, whereby this information was easily accessible, had already been checked and audited. You've also got 360 photographs of the spaces, and so you can effectively walk around the building. If you have all of this information, am I right that you'd be able to reduce the amount of time it takes to do your fire strategy, retrospective fire strategy?
Yes, most of yes and no. Obviously, there'd be a time factor involved in digesting that information and
Still got to do that.
verifying it.
Yeah.
Sorry? Yes.
You've still got to do that, but you've not got to look for it.
No, absolutely not. And what I would hope to happen is that once the fire strategy document, in my experience, tends to be a very, very long, very detailed and very dry technical document identifying what, why, and justifying it. What is then needed for the facilities management is a short summary of that under the necessary headings to cover everything. So rather than having 5 pages of dry justification, a short paragraph, maybe only 3, 4, 5 centimeters long, summarizing the means of escape, the fire alarm, the smoke control, sprinklers, and how those work together, such that it's easy to identify the important measures, and that a change to one of those important measures then needs someone to go back to that long, dry technical document and work out how that change, which is proposed, will maintain that overall level of safety. So the strategy itself, I would, once you've got all that information, digested it and recorded it into a strategy, that strategy should then be summarized in something that's usable. Otherwise, it would just sit on the shelf in the same way as current documentation does. If you have an OM manual with all of that in it, it's extremely rare that anyone ever looks at it.
So,
but it's at least
this is where, and you know, probably 70% of the people on this call have seen this hundreds of times, but it's still important. Yeah. So it's a matter of looking at scenarios, in my view, so that you can say, right, smoke breaks out in the kitchen. One of the principal risks that we're trying, or hazards that we're trying to address, is to stop smoke from getting into that stairwell. Now, there's a number of measures that need to work together to address that. One is making sure, obviously, that you've got fire doors in place and they're fit for purpose, but also the wall, the penetration seals, all of those need to work together to be able to perform. But then you've got to assume that maybe the compartmentation still won't be 100% and you're going to get some smoke coming out. Therefore, we need a smoke control system. We need a detection system. We need signage. So I think, Ron, is that what we're doing here is we're providing a context for that information to be both used, and also when it's being inspected, that the inspection by various different software applications is all referring back to that same risk. So that's where I think we've got the opportunity to visualize a lot of this complex, dry information. Claire, thanks for joining us, Claire, by the way.
That's all right. Thanks for them. Right. So I probably look at things slightly different, as I have overall. It's not just fire safety. And just going back to where you're driving again to, George, for the golden thread, and a lot of the information that's being fed in to the group and how that needs to continue through the golden thread following the REBA stages, essentially, and how in facilities management we don't implement the same kind of processes and procedures as what's done in the REBA stages. And that's something that I'm actually looking to implement via BIM and strategies into facilities management. So there was a few things, like I think Paul mentioned and maybe Ron had mentioned, about some way to be able to detail or at least highlight where information is missing or not being updated.
Yep.
And that is I am in the process of building a software system that is extended from the AutoCAD build solution, but also highlighting areas where information has been missed, where things have not been updated on the frequency that they should have. And it also takes into some things that Pierre just mentioned about the CDEs. So essentially, we've got the IMS, which is where your business strategies and policies are held, the CDE, where it's worked on, and then the new system I'm putting in place is the validated information, and it doesn't.
Excellent. Well, it would be great to have a more specific conversation on that, because I'd really like to learn what you're doing, and also there's probably other software services, people, data sets that we can contribute as well.
Aye, that would be great. So
Carl.
it's really good to understand what everybody's input and their thoughts on where it's failing,
Yeah,
because I'll be taking that back into mine.
brilliant. Okay, Carl, I think you're next.
I think Mustafa had his hand up first.
Oh, sorry, I apologise, Mustafa. Apologies. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry for that. Just to contribute a bit in terms of the solution, and from most of the contributions, I can see that there is a problem in the industry in terms of the inefficiency when it comes to data management, and also there is a problem of the reduction in terms of manpower. We're having fewer fire safety officers, and also the disconnect in terms of management. So first and foremost, I think it will be good to also agree in terms of, if we're thinking of solutions, are we talking about a digital approach? So that is because when we're looking at the framework that can help to address these problems, we are talking about a digital approach that can help to manage that data, because we're having fewer manpower than a digital approach would be logical. But in as much as
this group, definitely, Mustafa, it will be digital.
yes, but the second factor is, in as much as we're talking about a digital approach, it's also important to check the maturity. So, for example, in terms of the digital approach, the design and construction processes are quite high level in terms of their maturity at the moment. Whereas when it comes to asset management, facilities management, there is a problem in terms of that uptake of that digitalized approach as well. So it's also important that we're aware that the solutions that we may be suggesting, the industry at the moment in terms of uptaking them, they may not be at that level to be able to operate in that digital manner. So the framework should also take into account those factors. Yeah. So talking about, I think, as a solution to the from that digital approach, I think one good thing that we should cover is aspects relating to responsibility and reporting. The framework should clearly articulate the people that should be responsible to update that fire strategy, and in terms of frequency of updating, and also linking it to the golden thread, just like you said. But I also think one good thing that would be useful is to have a reporting or a data template, because some people may want to implement that fire strategy or to see how they can constantly work on their risk assessments. But if a data template or a reporting template can be worked between some of us, as you know, as a sort of a white paper or suggestion, for example, then people in the industry would be able to see how to do it in terms of best practices. So, and that can take also, we can also present examples, for example, use cases, just like you showed in the presentation, which is sort of showing different
Mustafa,
scenarios.
would you be interested in helping us pull that together?
I'll be happy to contribute. Yeah,
good.
happy to do
Okay.
that. Yeah, and also finally, we need to think about enforcement. It may not be part of the framework, but enforcement is key. It has come up as something that needs to be strengthened.
Agreed. Tom.
Yeah, thanks, George. I'd like to be slightly deliberately contentious and propose that almost the entirety of the fire safety sector misunderstands the legal requirement for fire risk assessment. So Ron was rehearsing the view that fire risk assessment should be renewed, carried out again in every 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, pick a number, which is not what the legislation asks for. The legislation requires the responsible person to carry out a suitable and sufficient assessment, does not ask for it to be repeated, but asks for it to be reviewed regularly without, as we all know, I'm sure, without specifying exactly how frequently that review should take place. I propose, and I would suggest that this group takes it under its consideration of fire strategy. I would suggest, and I'm talking, Ron, I'm talking specifically about new build, not about retrospective. I suggest that a fire strategy document done correctly and followed through into build and future management obviates the need for a fire risk assessment, because that suitable and sufficient assessment of risk is considered at design and suitable general precautions are put in place. I guess then the only remaining element of fire risk assessment is, are people using this building the way it was designed to be used, and so on. And so there always will be general precautions required after completion of the build. But I suggest that as part of this group's consideration, it asks that question: have we as a fire safety sector entirely understood the place of fire risk assessment as required by the Fire Safety Order, Article 9?
Can I respond directly to that now?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Is that right?
No, I completely agree, utterly, in that, yes, if the fire strategy for the building is developed correctly and the use to which the building is put is maintained as the same, then there is very little need for that. So for a full assessment of the building, assessment of everything to be just repeated. If there has been no change, then there is no need to repeat a very intrusive and intensive assessment process and development of a new document. However, there is a requirement, should something go wrong, to be able to demonstrate due diligence. And that's the reason, I think, the reason for the statement that says that it should be reviewed regularly, and that's the fire risk assessment review process. That is the bread and butter of the fire risk assessment guidance, is that review. I think the bit that is completely misunderstood is that that is just looking for those changes that have occurred, really. And are the systems being maintained and managed? Yeah, that's the primary part. Have there been any changes? Frequently, the answer is yes, there have, and the fire risk assessor is then being required to try and solve them. Well, fire risk assessors are not fire safety designers, and I think it is that's the primary misunderstanding, is that they should just be identifying when further work is needed, and as soon as that box is ticked that says yes, there's a significant change been made here, the remedial action should be, you need to get this reviewed by someone competent at this level. So I completely agree. There is I think there's a failure to understand the process, and that clarifying that process, I think, would move us a long way forward.
Brilliant.
Can I just add to that?
Andrew,
Can I just add to that, George, and Ron? I think Cole, that's a good point you've raised, and Ron, so kind of appreciate where you're coming from. I've kind of lived that scenario where a brand spanking new development, it's through the handover process, and an institutional investor that's taken half of the development, hundreds of units, has said, prior occupation, we want an FRA done. The FRA has been bought and paid for, it's been carried out, and there were a significant number of high risks that required remediation before the investor would move tenants in. And there's obviously a huge amount of pressure on me, amongst others. It wasn't my responsibility to put right, but I'm kind of stuck in the middle. But to make sure that they actually got rectified. But so I think there is a place for an FRA on a new development. For me, it comes down to the word trust. Do I trust what I'm being given? And can I evidence it? And for me, the answer is yes, I can evidence it. Do I trust it? No. And that's just a lived and learned experience, which kind of takes me to that place. And hopefully I'm not offending anybody. But you mentioned earlier on that in regards to the fire safety strategy, you said it's rare that people look at it. And I agree. It is a long and lengthy document. In some cases, actually, do you know what? It's kind of difficult to translate. But the question has to be, and I like the idea of a summary, but the question has to be and I used to have this in my meetings, with my team, my FM team, monthly, are we compliant? Is the building compliant? And if the answer was yes, the question would be, right, show me, which comes down to, kind of a summary and then evidencing what we've got, being able to provide the documentation. So for me, it comes down to, I know we talk systems and we talk digital approaches, but for me, do you know what I'm going to start with? It starts with the people. And it comes back to Paul Sheedy, you said earlier, it's been X number of years since there's been, you think your emergency lighting battery backup system wasn't being looked at, batteries were faulty. Someone's responsible for that. That's an individual not doing their job. So I think for me, systems and process, great. Documentation, great, but it starts with people. The question is, are we compliant? If someone says, yes, we are, the question has to be, can you show me?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andy. Carl.
Yeah, just 2 quick points. One on Andrew's observations there. I think using fire risk assessment to snag a construction project and finding risk items demonstrates a breakdown in the supervision of construction. And the fire risk assessor is being misused at that point. And so we should fix the construction process. And I realise that's a huge brushstroke comment, but I think again, that's a misunderstanding of the role of the fire risk assessor. Also, just to come back to Ron's comments, I think what we do, certainly in the housing sector, which is where I primarily work, we treat the fire risk assessment, the repeat visit, as a health and safety audit. And that's not its intention. I would illustrate this with housekeeping. So it comes under the broad heading of housekeeping. A fire risk assessor finds a mattress in the stairway and reports that as an action in the fire risk assessment to remove the mattress from the stairway. That should already have been found by a housing officer or an estate manager or somebody who is following the general precaution identified of housekeeping, inspecting the site and removing combustibles and so on. But we have fallen into this terrible habit of using the fire risk assessor to do that. I suspect it may not be disconnected that the advice generally was written by a fire risk assessor. So why wouldn't you give that repeated income stream to the fire risk assessor in that case? I think that we should seriously reconsider how we use fire risk assessment in this country.
Brilliant. Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I just wanted to make sure that what we're doing here isn't going to be wasted and lost. We've recorded it and we'll produce a share a report. But would you just put in the chat if you'd like a follow-up meeting? If you just put follow-up, yeah. Because I actually think we're making some really good progress today, but I think we've spent obviously a lot of time looking at what the challenges are, and I think we're starting to uncover some solutions. But I think we need to move forward with that. So if you're up for a follow-up meeting, put it in the chat. I mean, we'll probably invite you anyway, but it would be good to just get some feedback because we're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer, and we want to make sure that we're making the best use of our time. Okay, Ron.
Yes, I'll kept having to repeat my hand because every time I make a comment, it disappeared again. So on the basis of trying to move things forward, I have some observations on, if you like, strategic requirements, things I think are going to be very necessary, and it may well be, Claire, that these are hopefully useful to you. Not sure. First one, I've always viewed the requirement, the functional requirement of the golden thread as being electronic as problematic, because that's the final solution. It must be based on something which is itself workable. The system, the electronic recording must be of a system which works. We don't have a system that works at the moment. There's no point electronically recording it. It mustn't be an information dump. The electronic recording systems that I have had the misfortune to be involved in have been information dumps, and I've stopped using them and had to go back to send me a paper record. So second one, then, it must also be scalable. So we talked about simple buildings not needing a fire strategy. Now, they all need a fire strategy, but the fire strategy can be very simple, and it must work. If we have a golden thread recording system that's electronic of a usable system, it must work for a building that's got 4 flats, 2 on the ground, 2 on the first, and it must also work for 22 Bishopsgate. By the same process, so that the person who starts on 4 flats can get promoted eventually to managing 22 Bishopsgate. It must work through a range of software, so it can't be a closed protocol. If it's closed protocol, then we're on to a disaster. So it has to work across a range of competitive systems. Where's that now? And it must continue to give the necessary emergency information during that emergency. So the trouble with another problem with electronic recording is that much of that information is not needed during the emergency, but some of it is. And if the power has gone out, if the system has gone down, there has to be a backup that will provide that urgently required emergency information.
Now, thank you, Ron. That's brilliant. So we can pick up on that, if we may, in the next session. So we'll try and arrange something for a couple of weeks' time or something like that, if people are good with that. Before I just hand over to you, Pierre, we are out of time. Matt, I want to make sure that you've got out of this what you were looking for. Is there anything else that you wanted to raise?
No, I found it very useful. There is some, I think there's a broader piece on there as well. I did make a note about high risk buildings as well, which I think we need to do an overlap on for some engagements I've had with them around containment, because I think that's another section where you've got a building within a building and how that all fits together, because it's who owns bits and pieces, and you can understand how it becomes a nightmare, but there is actually an incident on who owns it, who caused it, and who's responsible for it, because it becomes a bigger piece on the containment piece of, is it where does the building stop and start? Is it modular? Is it a whole building? So there's a lot of good information today, I think.
Brilliant. Pierre.
Right, can you hear me now?
Can now.
There we go. Thank you very much, guys. So very quickly, one of the biggest things I see throughout all of our discussion here is about ownership, not ownership as in the landlord, but ownership of data, ownership of the information, ownership of the tasks that are being carried out. Now, one of the things that I see is the responsible person is really important about holding that data. So Ron, the same story about having this information in a box in my office, I'm in charge, is no good. This is the story of the CDE, the shared, but it demands a number of things about the standardization, how the data is collected. Now, you indicated earlier, and this is the important part, is that you're collecting information in the field. And every single time that there's a visit of some sort and there is information collected by 360 cameras, etc., it needs to go into that CDE. And yes, it could be a pool of where you dump stuff, but at the same time, the person that's responsible for this thing suddenly has the ability to gather field information from different sources and be able to process it. So this is part of the AI process, which will allow that kind of sanity to say there are exceptions. I think the important part is about change management, and that relates to the owner, the tenant, and then that responsible person, because when somebody installs a door, who knows how that's actually happened? Now, surely when somebody walked into the building as a contractor, small subcontractor, white van brigade, whatever, there's got to be some mechanism in place, like Grenfell Tower, that you don't have people leaving the doors open, or if the door holdback's not working, putting something in place to stop it. And those fundamental things need to be done. I think that technology is a big enabler here. And what it is that if you take the same information can then be made available to the local council across the portfolio of their buildings within their remit, suddenly you can see where there's typical problems coming up, and they can address it at that time, focusing on where the problems are. Not us talking about the problems, but actually how we can resolve that. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Brilliant, Pierre. Thank you. And I think it's testament to the fact that we've had a successful meeting, because we're 5 minutes over and we've still got 70% of the people still with us. Bernard, something final from you?
George, thank you very much indeed. Just by way of introduction, 48 years ago, I attended a 3-day firefighting course, the Royal Navy at Gosport, and then I embarked upon 3 months firefighting in central London. And we were fortunate, although we were completely overwhelmed, somehow the Army managed to respond to well over 2,500 fires. One of the limitations we all had was we had no breathing apparatus. But the buildings 50 years ago were much smaller. You were able to get in and out of a building whilst holding our breath. We were able to rescue many victims that had been overwhelmed by carbon monoxide poisoning. And my work at the moment is very much in performance and using science rather than compliance to assess the air loss rate through fire doors, windows, and hatches. And we know that the legislation is going to change. We know that the fire door smoke test will no longer permit the taping up of the threshold gap, and if applicable, the letter plate. And that those doors are going to have to be tested as they are expected to perform. The challenge we have is that we've got about 6 million flat entrance doors. I don't know how many fire doors that are certified as smoke sealed exist. I have no idea. But we've got to test these, and we've got to test these in situ. And that is the area which I'm working at the moment. And that is the area where we thankfully now have a solution. So thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bernard. And yeah, I think we can talk about that solution and others in a follow-up session. Right. Okay. I'm going to call it to a close. Anybody else for any final comments? No? Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for contributing your time. I hope you all feel it's been useful, and we'll see you on the next one. Remember that on Thursday, we've got one on AWAB's law, which also, as I've learned this morning, is also relevant for fire safety. So if you want an invite for that, then just say, if you put in AWAB's law into the chat, we'll send you an invite to that. It's 11 o'clock on Thursday morning. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks,
George. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, George.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.